My sergeant didn't just punish me. He sentenced me to death. He took my rifle. He took my ammo. And he forced me to walk into a jagged kill zone carrying nothing but batteries. He thought I would die a coward's death. He didn't know I would find a broken weapon in the dirt and finish the fight alone. "You are an operational threat," Vance said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, grinding tone, like gravel in a mixer. "You hesitate. You question. And out here, questions get good men killed. I cannot in good conscience allow you to carry lethal force when you don't have the spine to use it." He tossed my rifle to the supply corporal standing behind him. The corporal caught it awkwardly, looking down at his boots, unable to meet my eyes. That was the moment the silence truly hit. In the infantry, your weapon is your life. It is the extension of your will. Without it, you are nothing but a target in uniform. I stood there, brown hair matted to my forehead with sweat, the dust-streaked skin of my face burning with a shame so hot I thought it would leave scars. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend my record, to remind him of the 3 tours I'd already survived, but the look in his eyes stopped me cold. This wasn't about safety. This was about dominance. "You'll still patrol," Vance said, turning his back on me to address the squad, dismissing me like I was a piece of broken gear. "But you'll carry the extra radio batteries and the litter. You're a mule now. Specialist. Maybe if you sweat enough, you'll remember what it takes to be a soldier." He walked away, leaving me standing in the center of the compound, unarmed, while 20 men looked at me and then looked away, terrified that my bad luck might be contagious. I looked down at my empty hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it tasted like copper. I didn't know it then, but that betrayal was just the beginning. I was about to walk into the worst firefight of our deployment with nothing but a pocket knife and a backpack full of batteries, led by a man who had just signed my death warrant. The heat in the valley was a physical weight, pressing down on the base like a suffocating blanket. We were stationed in one of those forgotten corners of the map, a place where the supply trucks only came once a week and the command updates were always 3 days old. The dirt here was fine, like talcum powder, and it got into everything. It was in the creases of my uniform, in the lines of my palms, and grinding between my teeth. I had spent 6 months in this hellhole, doing the job, keeping my head down, trying to get back to the States with all my limbs attached. I wasn't a hero. I knew that. I was a grinder. I did the work. I had the brown hair, the fade, the light stubble. I looked like every other grunt in the army, but I took pride in my competence. I knew my weapon systems. I knew the radio protocols. I knew how to read the terrain. That was why the conflict with Vance had started. It wasn't because I was incompetent. It was because I was right when he was wrong. 2 days prior, during a route clearance, I had called out a potential IED marker that Vance had ignored. He wanted speed. I wanted survival. I halted the column. He screamed. We called EOD. I was right. It was a pressure plate rigged to a 155mm shell. I saved 2 trucks that day, but in doing so, I had humiliated him in front of the lieutenant. Vance was a man who built his authority on fear, not respect. By proving him wrong, I had cracked the foundation of his ego. And now, he was filling the cracks with my dignity. The platoon was a tight group, or at least I thought it was. Miller, a machine gunner from Texas with a dip of tobacco permanently wedged in his lip, walked past me as I was packing the litter onto my back. He paused, looking around to make sure Vance wasn't watching. "He's trying to break you, brother," Miller whispered, pretending to check his saw. "Ammo. Don't let him. Just hump the gear. We got your back if shit pops off." "Do you?" I asked, my voice raspy, because it looked like everyone was real interested in the dirt when he took my rifle. Miller flinched. He knew I was right. In the military, rank is gravity. You don't fight gravity unless you want to get crushed. It's messed up, man. We all know it. But he's the sergeant. What are we gonna do? "Just keep your sectors clear, Miller," I said, hoisting the heavy medical bag. "Because I can't do it for you anymore." The preparation for the patrol was a surreal nightmare. Usually there is a ritual to gearing up. You check your mags, you tap your optic, you slide the bolt back to check the chamber. It's a rhythmic, calming dance of steel and polymer. Now, I stood there adjusting straps on a bag that held 0 defensive capability. I felt phantom limb syndrome for a rifle that wasn't there. I kept reaching for a pistol grip that didn't exist. Vance walked down the line inspecting the men. When he got to me, he didn't check my gear. He just smiled, a thin, cruel expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Ready to earn your keep, mule?" he asked. "Ready to follow orders, Sergeant," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion he wanted to see. "Good," he said, turning to the squad. "We're hitting the eastern ridge. Intel says it's quiet, but we need to show presence. Keep your spacing, and keep an eye on our operational threat back there. If he runs, shoot. Him." He laughed. A few of the younger privates chuckled nervously, not sure if he was joking. I knew he wasn't. As we stepped outside the wire, leaving the relative safety of the concrete barriers, I felt a cold chill settle in my gut that the desert sun couldn't touch. I was walking into a war zone with a target on my back and empty hands. I wondered if I would survive the next hour, let alone the day. The silence of that valley wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air in a room right before a fight breaks out. As we pushed deeper into the sector, the weight of the extra batteries I was carrying began to cut into my traps. The straps of the rucksack dug in, pinching nerves, sending electric jolts of numbness down my arms. Every step was a reminder of my demotion. A rifle weighs 7 pounds. This pack weighed 80. Vance knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just disarming me. He was exhausting me, making sure that if trouble did start, I would be too physically broken to react. I focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The dust tasted metallic like old pennies. I kept my head on a swivel, scanning the ridgeline, but without a scope, I was blind to the details. I felt a phantom itch in my right hand, the muscle memory of a pistol grip that wasn't there. My fingers would twitch, curling around empty air, seeking the familiar texture of polymer. It was a psychological amputation. I felt naked, not just in the sense of protection, but in identity. A soldier without a rifle isn't a soldier. He's a victim waiting to happen. We halted near a dried-out wadi for a short security pause. The heat was radiating off the rocks in shimmering waves, distorting the horizon. I took a knee, the heavy pack groaning as I settled. Sweat stung my eyes. Vance walked down the line, checking on the men. He stopped in front of me, his shadow falling over my face, blocking out the harsh sun. He took a slow sip from his hydration tube, watching me, struggled to adjust the load. "Heavy, Specialist?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "That's the weight of incompetence. You feel that burn? That's weakness leaving the body. Or maybe it's just you realizing you don't belong here." I looked up at him, squinting against the glare. I wanted to lung at him. I wanted to scream that I had earned my combat infantryman badge while he was still pushing papers in a S1 shop. But I swallowed the rage. It tasted like bile. "I'm holding." "The line, Sergeant," I said, my voice steady despite the fatigue. "You're holding us back," he corrected, spitting on the ground near my boot. "If we take contact, you stay prone. You don't move. You don't try to be a hero. You are a logistical asset, nothing more. If I see you trying to play soldier, I'll have you court-martialed for insubordination before the dust settles." He moved on, leaving me seething in the dirt. I looked over at Miller, who was scanning the high ground. Miller caught my eye and gave a subtle shake of his head. A silent message. Let it go. Just survive. But survival feels different when you can't shoot back. As we moved out again, the terrain grew more hostile. The walls of the valley closed in, turning the patrol route into a choke point. My tactical brain was screaming. Fatal funnel. No cover. High ground exposure on both sides. I could feel the enemy eyes on us. It's a sixth sense you develop after enough tours. The feeling of being watched through a reticle. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, prickling against my sweat-soaked collar. I started counting my steps to keep calm. 1, 2, 3. Somewhere. A goat bleated. 4, 5, 6. The wind shifted, carrying the faint, sweet scent of chai tea from a distant village. 7, 8. Then came the sound. It wasn't a gunshot at first. It was the distinct, terrifying clack hiss of an RPG initiator firing. Time didn't just slow down. It shattered. I saw the smoke trail spiral out. From the rocks above us, a gray finger of death pointing directly at the lead vehicle's position. Boom. The explosion was a physical blow. It punched the air out of my lungs and threw me sideways into the dirt. The world turned into a monochrome nightmare of brown dust and gray smoke. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the shouting. I scrambled to my knees, instinctively reaching for my chest, for my rifle, and grasping nothing but the straps of the medical bag. That moment of realization was worse than the explosion. The enemy machine guns opened up, a rhythmic tearing sound like canvas ripping. Rap-hat, rap-hatak. Bullets impacted the ground around me, kicking up little geysers of sand. I was in the kill zone. I was unarmed, and for the first time in my military career, I wasn't a combatant. I was prey. The fear that washed over me was cold and paralyzing. It wasn't just fear of dying, it was the terror of uselessness. I watched tracers streak overhead looking, like angry hornets. I saw Miller returning fire, his jaw set, his weapon shaking with the recoil. I saw the new private, Davis, freeze in the open, his eyes wide with panic. I looked for Vance. I needed orders. I needed direction. I looked towards the cover of the heavy rocks where the command element should be, and that's when I saw him cowering. He wasn't on the radio. He wasn't directing fire. He was curled into a ball, pressing his helmet into the dirt, eyes squeezed shut. The contrast was blinding. The man who had mocked my courage was hiding, while the operational threat was watching his squad get cut to pieces. The rage that exploded in my chest then was hotter than the desert sun. It burned away the fear. It burned away the shame. I wasn't going to die here, and I wasn't going to let my brothers die because a coward held the rank of sergeant. That was the moment the switch flipped, the moment the mule died, and the soldier returned. The patrol moved like a slow serpent through the rocky terrain. The eastern ridge was a jagged spine of rock that overlooked a series of dry riverbeds, wadis, that the enemy used as highways. Usually, I would be on point or flanking, my eyes scanning for movement, my rifle raised. Today, I was in the center of the formation, affectionately known as the fatal funnel, if we got hit from the sides. But today, it felt like a cage. The humiliation was a physical sensation. It burned under my skin. Every time we halted, the other soldiers would take a knee and scan outward, weapons ready. I just stood there, or crouched, holding the strap of the heavy medical bag. I felt useless. I felt like a liability. I saw the way the new privates looked at me, with pity. That was worse than Vance's hate. Pity from a rookie is a poison that kills a veteran's soul. We were 3 clicks out when the terrain started to get complicated. The path narrowed, forcing us into a single file. High walls of rock rose up on either side. It was a classic. Ambush alley. I knew it. Miller knew it. I could see the tension in the shoulders of the man in front of me. "Sergeant," I whispered into the comms headset I was still allowed to wear. "This terrain is bad. We should hook right. Take the high ground." "Clear the comms, specialist." Vance's voice crackled in my ear, loud and distorted. "I didn't ask for a tactical assessment from the baggage train. Keep moving." I grit my teeth. This was military injustice in its purest form. He was walking us into a kill box just to prove he didn't have to listen to me. I looked up at the ridgeline. The sun was blinding, creating deep, black shadows in the crevices of the rocks. Perfect hiding spots. My heart hammered against my ribs. Without a weapon, my tactical awareness shifted. I wasn't looking for targets to shoot. I was looking for holes to die in. I was mapping out cover, calculating sprint times, analyzing the geometry of survival. My hands felt light, floating by my sides. I kept clenching, them into fists, trying to generate the tension that holding a rifle usually provided. I felt exposed, naked. It's a primal fear, being unarmed in the presence of predators. It taps into some ancient part of the lizard brain. You are no longer the hunter. You are prey. "Hold up," Miller signaled from the front. He raised a fist. The patrol froze. The silence of the desert rushed back in, heavy and oppressive. A hawk screeched somewhere high above. "What is it?" Vance hissed over the radio. "Movement. 2 o'clock. High ridge," Miller replied. "Probably goats," Vance dismissed. "Push through." "Sergeant, I have a bad feeling," Miller said. "I said push through, Miller. Don't make me come up there." I looked at the spot Miller had indicated. I didn't see goats. I saw an unnatural shape, a straight line in a world of curves. A barrel. "Contact front," I screamed, breaking protocol, breaking silence, breaking the chain of command. Vance spun around, furious. "Shut your mouth, you coward." His words were cut off by the crack thump of a sniper round. The dirt exploded inches from Vance's boot. And then, the world ended. The valley erupted. It wasn't just a sniper. It was a complex L-shaped ambush. Machine gun fire poured down from the ridge like liquid fire. RPGs streaked through the air with that terrifying whoosh sound, detonating against the rock walls and showering us with razor-sharp shrapnel. "Take cover! Take cover!" someone screamed. I dove behind a boulder, the heavy eye, medical bag slamming into my spine. Dust choked the air immediately, turning the bright afternoon into a brown twilight. Screams of medic started almost instantly. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the mule carrying the medical gear, but I couldn't move. The fire was too intense. I curled into a ball, rocks chipping off the boulder above my head and stinging my neck. This was the fall. This was the bottom. I was pinned down, weaponless, watching tracers stitch the air above me. I felt a surge of absolute terror. Not just the fear of death, but the fear of helplessness. If they rushed us, I couldn't do anything. I would just have to wait for the bullet. I squeezed my eyes shut, the shame of my situation warring with the adrenaline. "Return fire! Get eyes on!" Vance was screaming somewhere to my left, but his voice was high, pitched with panic. It didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a plea. I risked a glance around the boulder. The squad was getting chewed up. We were caught in the open. Miller was behind a low wall, his saw chugging rhythmically, trying to suppress the ridge, but he was taking heavy fire. The enemy had the high ground and the sun behind them. They were picking us apart. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" A private named Davis screamed from the open ground. He was writhing in the dust, clutching his leg. He was 10 meters from me. I looked at Vance. He was behind a thick slab of rock, safe. He saw Davis. He looked at Davis, then he looked at the enemy fire, and then he pulled his head back in. He wasn't going to move. The sergeant, the man who had called me a coward, was paralyzed. That image, Vance hiding while a kid bled out, snapped something inside me. The fear didn't vanish, but it changed. It hardened. It turned cold. The identity collapse I had felt earlier, the feeling of being just a mule, evaporated. I wasn't a mule. I was an infantryman, and I had a job to do. I took a breath that tasted of sulfur and dust. I didn't have a rifle, but I had legs. I unclipped the heavy medical bag, grabbed the drag strap, and sprinted. The air around me snapped and hissed. I slid into the dirt next to Davis, grabbing his vest. "I got you, buddy. I got you," I yelled over the roar of the guns. I dragged him back, straining every muscle, my boots slipping in the loose gravel. Bullets kicked up sand in my face. I heaved him behind my boulder and ripped open the medical kit. Tourniquet, high and tight. "You're okay," I told him, cranking the windlass until the bleeding stopped. "Stay down." I looked up. The situation was deteriorating fast. The enemy fire was intensifying on our right flank. They were maneuvering. They were coming down the ridge to roll us up. If they got to the flank, we were all dead. "Vance!" I screamed. "They're flanking right. Shift fire." Vance looked at me, his eyes wide and glassy. He was hyperventilating. He shook his head. "We pull back," he stammered. We retreat." "We can't retreat," Miller yelled, from his position. "We're pinned. If we move, we die. Fall back, that's an order," Vance shrieked. He stood up, not to fight, but to run. He turned his back on the enemy, abandoning his men to save his own skin. It was the ultimate betrayal. The man who stripped my honor was now stripping the platoon of its chance to survive. He made it 3 steps before an RPG struck the rock face above him. The explosion didn't hit him directly, but the concussion wave threw him like a rag doll. He slammed into the ground and didn't get up. He was alive. I saw him crawling, whimpering, trying to hide in a crevice. But he was done. He had abdicated his command. The right flank was wide open. I could see the enemy fighters bounding down the rocks, moving aggressively. They knew we were broken. They were coming to finish it. I looked around frantically. I needed a weapon. Any weapon. My eyes locked on a shape in the dirt near where Miller was fighting. It was a rifle, but it wasn't Miller's. It looked old, battered. It was a standard issue carbine, but it was lying in a pool of oil and grit, the result of a catastrophic malfunction. It must have belonged to one of the privates who got hit earlier, or maybe it was discarded when it jammed. I didn't think. I moved. I sprinted across the gap to Miller's position. "Cover me!" I roared. Miller swung his gun and unleashed a burst of hate. keeping the enemy heads down for a split second. I dove and grabbed the rifle. It was a disaster. The bolt was halfway back, a double feed jammed so tight the brass was crushed. The receiver was caked in mud. It was a broken weapon, a piece of junk, but it was all I had. "It's dead! It won't shoot!" Miller yelled, reloading his own weapon. "Get down! Watch me!" I yelled back. I rolled onto my back, slamming the stock of the rifle against the ground, mortaring it. Whack! Nothing. I did it again, screaming with the effort. Whack! The bolt flew back, ejecting the mangled casings in a spray of mud. I racked the charging handle. It felt gritty, like sandpaper on glass. I rolled prone, bringing the weapon up. The optic was shattered, the glass webbed with cracks. I couldn't use the sights. I had to shoot instinctively, using the barrel as a pointer, walking my rounds onto the target. The enemy fighters were 30 meters away now, closing fast. I pulled the trigger. Bang! The gun cycled, but slowly. Gritty. I pulled again. Bang! I saw the lead fighter drop. The weapon jammed again. Failure to eject. "Come on, you piece of trash!" I screamed. I ripped the magazine out, cleared the chamber with my fingers, burning them on the hot brass, slammed the mag back in, and racked it. Bang! Bang! 2 more fighters scrambled for cover. I was holding the flank with a single-shot bolt-action assault rifle, fixing a malfunction between every trigger pull. It was combat improvisation at its most desperate. My hands were a blur of motion. Shoot, mortar, clear, rack, shoot. I wasn't thinking about the humiliation anymore. I wasn't thinking about Vance. I was a machine of survival. "Miller, shift left. I got the right," I ordered. I assumed command. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a vacuum that needed filling. "On it." Miller didn't question. He swung his gun. The enemy wasn't expecting resistance from the broken flank. They had seen the sergeant run. They thought we were done. My slow, rhythmic, accurate fire confused them. I dropped another fighter who tried to rush. The gap, the broken rifle survival was real. "Grenade!" I yelled, pulling a frag from the vest of the wounded man beside me. I pulled the pin with my teeth, cliché, but my hands were occupied, and hurled it over the rock wall. The explosion sent a plume of black smoke into the air. "Push them back! Fire superiority!" I roared, my voice cracking. The platoon, hearing a voice of authority, rallied. They stopped looking at the retreating sergeant and started looking at the enemy. The volume of fire increased. We weren't just surviving, we were fighting back. I fired the last round in the magazine, the bolt locking back on an empty chamber with a dry clack. My hands were bleeding, burned and covered in carbon. But the right flank was clear. The enemy attack had broken against the rock of our resistance. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the groans of the wounded and the distant sound of retreating footsteps. The air smelled of cordite and copper blood. My chest heaved. I looked down at the rifle in my hands. It was a ruin. The handguard was melted. The receiver was cracked. It was a broken tool that had done an impossible job. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like jelly. I looked around the battlefield. The platoon was battered, but we were alive. Miller looked at me, his face caked in soot, a look of absolute disbelief in his eyes. He nodded, a slow, respectful nod. Then I looked for Vance. He was being dragged out of his hole by 2 privates. He wasn't wounded, not really. Scratches, bruises, but his eyes were empty. He looked at the squad, and then he looked at me. He saw the broken rifle in my hands. He saw the blood on my uniform, not mine, but Davis's. He saw the way the men were looking at me, and then the way they looked at him. He tried to stand up straight, to regain some shred of authority. "Status report," he croaked. "Sit down, Sergeant," Miller said. It wasn't a suggestion. Vance opened his mouth to yell, but the lieutenant's voice crackled over the platoon radio. 1-1, this is actual. Drone feed confirms enemy retreat. Good work holding that flank. What is your casualty status? I walked over to the radio operator, took the handset from his trembling hand, and keyed the mic. I looked Vance dead in the eye as I spoke. "Actual, this is 1-1 Bravo," I said, using my call sign. "We have 2 wounded, urgent surgical. We are secure." "Copy, Bravo. Put Sergeant Vance on." I paused. The wind whistled through the canyon. Vance looked at me, fear pleading in his eyes. He knew I held his career in my hand. He knew I could end him right now. "Sergeant Vance is indisposed, sir," I said, my voice calm, the adrenaline fading into a cold resolve. "He is unable to perform his duties. I am assuming command of the element until extraction." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, a simple, heavy acknowledgement. "Copy that, Bravo. Extraction inbound. Out." I handed the radio back. I didn't say a word to Vance. I didn't have to. The look on his face, the realization that everyone knew, that the cowardice had been exposed in the bright light of day, was enough. He slumped against the rock, defeated not by a bullet, but by the weight of his own failure. I walked back to the edge of the perimeter, still holding the broken rifle. I sat down in the dirt, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a freight train. I looked at the weapon. It was garbage. It was trash. But it had saved us. The extraction. Chopper arrived 20 minutes later, the rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust that felt like a baptism. As we loaded the wounded, I saw the colonel waiting at the LZ. He had been listening to the comms. He had seen the drone feed. When we landed, medics rushed for Davis. Vance walked off the bird alone, head down. No one spoke to him. He walked straight past the colonel, who didn't even acknowledge his salute. The colonel walked up to me. I was a mess. Dirty, bloody, holding a piece of scrap. Metal that used to be a gun. I stood at attention, or as close as I could manage. "Specialist," the colonel said, eyeing the weapon. "I heard you had some equipment issues." "Improvised, sir," I said. He looked at Vance's retreating figure, then back at me. He understood. In the military, secrets don't stay secret for long, and truth has a way of bleeding out on the battlefield. "Good work," he said quietly. "Get cleaned up. We need to talk about your future. And get yourself a new rifle. You earned it." I watched him walk away. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking, but the shame was gone. The humiliation had burned away in the heat of the fight. I had walked into the valley as a mule, stripped of my dignity, labeled a coward. I walked out carrying the weight of the lives I'd saved. Vance had tried to bury me. He tried to take my identity by taking my weapon, but he forgot the most basic lesson of the infantry. The weapon is just a tool. The soldier is the will. You can strip the gear, you can take the rank, but you cannot take the fight out of the man if the fire is real. I dropped the broken rifle onto the pile of gear. It clattered loudly, a final note in the symphony of the day. I took a deep breath of the cooler evening air. The stars were coming out, indifferent to our little wars. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me, the kind that only comes after the storm has passed and the house is still standing. I learned something that day on the ridge. Loyalty to a rank is meaningless if the man wearing it is hollow. True loyalty is to the men beside you, to the mission, and to the truth. And sometimes, to protect that loyalty, you have to break the rules. You have to grab a broken gun and stand your ground when the person supposed to lead you runs away. I looked back at the darkness of the valley one last time. Where loyalty ends, justice begins.